if I had to title it, I think to this final talk I would have added Conservation of Information and the End of Materialism. Because I think it's really some recent results in information theory that are sounding the death knell of materialism. Now, when I say that, I mean, there's always the joke, right, with Mark Twain, rumors of my death have been highly exaggerated or something like that. And materialists tend to be pretty confident that we're blowing smoke and that there's really nothing to it. But I want to suggest to you that there is. Now, this is a talk, the other two talks that I've gave you are pretty much standard shtick. I mean, this is the sort of stuff I do all the time. And there was a gentleman who came up to me today and said, I've read your stuff, but I was really grateful that, you brought it down, made it understandable. And so I'm going to try to do this with this talk, but some of this is new material. And I'm still working my way through trying to make this accessible. So I would ask your indulgence, but I'd also want to open it up at some point for questions, and so we can just try to clarify this. Because I think the ideas are accessible, but they can also get pretty hairy if you do the technical stuff. And so it's just trying to get that balance that I'm going to try to work through with you. So let's talk about information. I mean, it's kind of a sexy word. You think information theory. We live in an information age, right? I mean, we have our smartphones, our laptops, the internet, web. I mean, information is just running rampant. Everything can be reduced to information. It seems. Your iTunes, your videos, the streaming. All of this is information in some sense, and it is. And yet, for the materialists, information is a property of matter. Okay, and you see this over and over again in the materialist literature. Christian de Duve, biochemist, wrote a book, Vital Dust, some years back, 1995, I think is when it came out. And he describes various ages of the world, and you get the later ages have conscious life like us. But there's an age of information in his various ages. That's the second age, but the very first age is the age of chemistry. Okay, and so he's going to look to matter, and then information is the way matter is structured. Okay, and so it's a property of information is a property of matter. Now, what I want to argue in this talk is that information is something that really rides free of matter, that it can't be reduced, that it's something separate from matter, if you will, and that it has an identity of its own. And so materialism, as a consequence, is dead because this is something as fundamental as matter. So I'm going to argue that. I have a book coming out in August titled Being as Communion and Metaphysics of Information, where I actually take this further and argue that matter is itself a type of information. Okay, and so that's an even stronger thesis. These ideas, I mean, these have been mooted by other people, notably John Wheeler, one of the most famous theoretical physicists of the last century, and I think he lived into this century still. But anyway, that's a stronger thesis, but I just want to at least establish the identity of information as something separate from matter in this talk. So, let me start with a little parable. It's in one of my books, The Design Revolution. There's a sculptor named Laszlo, and he's quite famous, and you are an interior decorator. You've been hired by Bill Gates to decorate his music room, and you've hired Laszlo to give you a bust of the composer Beethoven. And Laszlo agrees to the contract, is going to be paid a hefty sum, let's say $50,000. And the next day he shows up with a crate and says, "I'm done." And you're surprised. You say, "Wow, how could this be?" That's quick work. And with some fanfare, he unveils it, and there you have a block of marble, just a rectangular block. You say, "Well, wait a second, this isn't what we agreed on." He says, "Oh, sure, bust of Beethoven is in there. You just have to imagine that certain particles are removed." And you start getting into it because you don't feel like paying that $50,000 fee, because you're not convinced that Beethoven is in there and that he's done what he's supposed to do. So Bill Gates, in his avuncular manner, strolls up and he says, Laszlo, you make a very interesting point, and I think we can come to some agreement. I have here in this disk Windows 9, and I will give it to you. You can market it, black market, and anything you want in payment for this marble bust of Beethoven. And Laszlo is thinking that's worth billions to me, so he grabs it, goes to his computer, and he finds it's a blank disk. And Bill Gates tells him, as Laszlo gets all upset, it's just you got to imagine where the right pits are in that polycarbonate for the operating system of Windows 9. Now you see the point. I mean, there's something about information, where it's not just reducible to matter. That disk is in some ways going to be, it's going to have the same weight as the disk that would have the Windows 9 or whatever the next operating system is going to be. And yet the one is going to be much more valuable than the other, right? Now, that's suggesting that there's something new to information or something going on over and above matter, but what really? What's going on there? And is it still, even with this parable, it's still not clear that information is something that's really over and above matter, that's not reducible to it in some sense. It's not merely a property of matter. So let's talk a little bit about information, because I think often we think of information as something we can point to. There's a book, it contains information. There are things, there's a computer hard drive that contains information. And so I think often we think of information as a thing. And I want to put it to you that it's really better to think of information as a verb rather than as a noun. And I want that to settle in, because I think it's going to be very helpful as you think about this whole issue of information. So what do I mean thinking of it as a verb instead of as a noun? Information always involves a reduction of possibilities. It's a movement from, if you will, potential to actual. Okay? Right now I'm communicating information to you. I'm speaking to you. There are lots and lots of sound combinations that can be coming out of my mouth. Okay? Of those possible sound combinations, most of them would be gibberish. Only a very few would have any meaning in any natural language. Okay, so there's a reduction of possibilities from all the possible sound combinations, all the gibberish that could be coming out, to coherent sentences in a natural language. But there are lots of natural languages. Of all the possible natural languages I could be speaking, there's a reduction to English. Of all the sentences that I could be uttering in English, there are very few that would be appropriate to a conversation that we're having right now about information. Okay? So it's this constant reduction. And as you're reducing, okay, more and more information is being generated. So when I said it's a verb, we think of there are all these things that are possibilities. I could be speaking just about anything that could be coming out of my mouth. But then there's this vast reduction of possibilities to what is actually coming out of my mouth, from potential to actual. And the verb is what takes you from potential to the actual. That's the information. It's an act of information. Okay, I want you to think of it in those terms, because I think that's helpful. Because, well, for one thing, it allows you to measure information, and I think it actually clarifies some confusions about it. So, if that's information, this reduction of possibilities, and what happens, the more possibilities you reduce, the more information is conveyed. If I tell you it's raining outside, I've conveyed some information to you. Of all the possible weather patterns, I've told you this, not that. Okay? In fact, information always implies or involves negation. There's got to be some ruling out of possibilities. If I tell you it's raining outside or it's not raining outside, have I conveyed any information? Well, in a sense, I've left this whole range of possibilities open. I haven't told you anything about the weather. There are all these range of possibilities about the weather, and they're all still open possibilities. It's only by closing possibilities that you end up generating information. So if I tell you it's raining, I've ruled out it's not raining. If I tell you it's raining 1 inch an hour, that's a pretty good downpour. I've reduced things even further. Okay? Reduce things further, that's more information that I'm giving you. So that's how information works. And it's interesting because information works from the top down. You have to have the range of possibilities, then you've got to reduce. Matter is very much a bottom-up thing. You've got all these particles of matter, and then they've got to be aggregated in some way to form something hopefully meaningful. Okay, so it's a very different type of perspective. So that's how information works. How then do you measure information? Well, you measure information in terms of the reduction, but it's not enough just to say, well, there's been so much that's been reduced. What you do when you measure information is actually to apply probabilities. And you can think of it this way. You're a poker player, and you get a pair, okay? A pair has pretty good probability of happening. I've seen the probabilities, probably 30% or something like that. Okay, so I say a pair. Okay, that's information. I've ruled out, not having a pair, having, I guess if you have three of a kind, you've got a pair, but that rules out a straight flush and various things like that. Okay, so I've ruled out something when I say a pair. What if I tell you a royal flush? Have I given you more information or less information when I say royal flush as opposed to a pair? Anybody? Why have I given you more? Because I've ruled out more, right? But why have I ruled out more? Well, you think of it as ruling out all the individual poker hands, but in some sense, it depends on how you individuate the possibilities. If you think of the possibilities as just pairs and non-pairs, I've ruled out as much in one case as I have when I say poker, royal flush, and non-royal flush. I mean, if those are the only possibilities. So in order to get around how we individuate the possibilities that we're ruling out and focusing on with information, what we do is we assign probabilities to it. A royal flush, if we think of an equally probable distribution over the various types of possible poker hands, has probability, I think it's 1 in, I think it's, what was it? I think there are about 2,500,000 poker hands. I mean, you can go online, the probabilities for poker hands, and so there'll be 4 of those, and then there'll be many more for the pairs. And so the probability of getting a pair is going to be much higher, maybe something like 30%, whereas the probability of a royal flush is going to be on the order of 1 in 500,000, 1 in a million, something like that. And so when you think of measuring probabilities, measuring information, you get more information, the smaller probability, right? I've told you more. If I tell you it's raining outside and it's Seattle, I haven't told you very much because you can pretty much expect it to be raining outside. If I tell you it's raining outside and you're in the Sahara Desert, that's quite informative. That's a low probability event. That's something you wouldn't expect. It's something you couldn't necessarily figure out by yourself. And so it's the harder it is for you to figure it out by yourself, the more information. And what makes it harder to figure out? Well, it's a more improbable event. So this is, you may say, the intuition may not strike you as, you may think, well, does that really make sense? But that's how we do it. I mean, that's how information theory works. You measure information in terms of probabilities. Now, usually you don't leave it right there. You don't just say it's, low probability is high information content. Typically what information theorists do, in fact always what they do, is they transform probabilities by using a logarithmic transform. It's a logarithm to the base 2, which basically translates probabilities into bits. So if you think of flipping a fair coin, flip it 4 times, that's, let's say you get 4 heads in a row, that's a 1 in 16 probability, because it's 2 possibilities at each place, so 1 over 2 times 1 over 2 times 1 over 2 times 1 over 2, or 1/16. Okay, well, if you take the negative logarithm, the reason you take the negative is because a logarithm of a probability ends up being negative, and so you want to basically convert it. It ends up being minus the logarithm to the base 2 of 1 over 16 is 4. Okay, so it's 4 bits. That's how much information is involved. And this is very convenient for communication theorists. But what's neat about this transformation, it allows, in cases where information, where you've got different independent sources of information, it makes information additive because probabilities tend to multiply. They multiply when you have independence of events, and so this makes it additive. And so where I'm going with this, though, is when you have these information measures, it almost becomes as though information is money. When it's something, it's a commodity, okay? And it's been said that the most valuable commodity in the world today is what? Well, remember the movie Wall Street? We all remember the line, greed is good, but information is everything. Well, that wasn't quite the line. It was the most valuable commodity that I know is information, okay? And that is, in fact, this measure of information allows you to, basically, the more information you have, or the more information intensive some event or actualization of possibilities are, the larger the information measure when you do it that way. If you leave it at probabilities, I mean, they're equivalent formulations, but if you leave it at probabilities, what happens is smaller probability means more information. And so you're always trying to basically reverse the order of things. And so that's why it's just convenient to have these logarithmic information measures. But I'll move up and back between them. Okay, so that's how we measure information. Now, just as I said, I'm working my way through this. I'm trying to make this clear, which means also I'm trying a few new things. Okay. All right. Now, I said information, you should think of it as a verb. The way that I find it's really, and what sort of verb is it? Okay, I guess is what we might think. Well, with information, you always have a ruling out of some things to actualize something else. What does that correspond to in our experience? Well, I would say it corresponds to a decision. You know? Decision, I mean, the very word from the Latin, catere, to cut off, to kill. You're killing off certain possibilities in order to realize others. G.K. Chesterton talks about when you marry one woman, you rule out all the others, okay? That's what happens with information. It's interesting also, I was just at Bruce Gordon's talk on quantum mechanics, and there's a quantum mechanical view called the multiverse. And what it does is it doesn't rule out any possibilities. All possibilities get realized in these causally distinct, causally unrelated parallel universes. So what's happening though is with this information conception is that we are cutting off certain things and then realizing others. So that's one way to think about it. But in terms of scientific inquiry, the best way I find to think about information is in terms of search, seeking and finding. Okay? You can think of all of information really in terms of search. So how is that? I mean, that sounds counterintuitive, okay? But once you do that, make that move, it actually moves, it applies very nicely to evolutionary biology and the sciences generally, because so much of evolution can be conceived as an evolutionary search. Okay, but why do I say search? I mean, let's go back to the example of me talking to you right now. There are all these possibilities that could be coming out of my mouth, only very few are. So we might say that what my intelligence is doing is sorting through all these possible sound combinations and finding those that are appropriate to this discussion. I mean, this may sound a little bit stilted, maybe it's a little bit counterintuitive, but I don't think it's too counterintuitive, right? When you are writing a memo or an email, you are searching through a whole space of possible communications for the one that's appropriate. Okay? If you're a musician, you are searching for those notes that will convey what is your deepest longing and in your heart, right? Unless you're composing insipid music simply to pay the bills. So my point is just you can think of it as search. Okay? Now, when you think of information in terms of search, again, the verb, you've got possibilities that get constrained, where you rule out some things, say no to some things in order to say yes to some other things. Let's now try to I want to build up to how this might apply to evolutionary theory. Now, the question then is, when you have, when a search is taking place, when a search is successful for a target, when you find that right email or that right piece of music, or you find that treasure, or whatever it is that you're searching for, how did you do it? What did you... There are two types of, or at least two types of searches that you could do. One is you could do a blind search, you could do an exhaustive search, or you can do an intelligent search. Okay, and these are different types of searches. Think of an Easter egg hunt, because I think this example, if you get it, I think captures so much of what's going on then with information and search. Because I'm saying information and search are basically the same thing. Okay, when you find the thing you're looking for, I guess I still haven't found what I'm looking for, you too, but let's say you do find the thing you're looking for. Then, you've gotten to the object of your search. You've ruled out the other things. Okay, so you're doing an Easter egg hunt. Thing is, that Easter egg, there's one Easter egg. This is not like a church Easter egg hunt where you've got plenty of them and they're in clear sight with all the kids, because you want them all to have the experience of finding the egg. This is a vast area. This is, a place the size of Houston, with lots of nooks and crannies, and the egg is hidden someplace. How are you going to find that Easter egg? Well, it's a very small target. It's a needle in the haystack problem. That's always what these problems are in the sciences, if they mean anything, because if they're not needle in the haystack problems, then you can just do a brute search, a blind search, or an exhaustive search, and you'll find it. If there are only 6 places to look for something, I'll just go through the 6 places and find them. But if there are 10 billion trillion places to look, I do not have the resources, probabilistic resources, they end up being the same thing. I don't have the resources to do all that search. So I have to be smarter in my search, right? That's the whole point. You've got to be smarter. So how do you then find that Easter egg? Well, if you don't have any information about where that Easter egg is, though, what can you do? You're just going to be wandering around. It's just going to be blind, random. Exhaustive isn't going to work because you're going to expire before you can search every possible place. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to hope that there's somebody as you're walking around who's going to say, warmer, warmer, colder, no, warmer, warmer, getting hotter. Hot, you're burning up, and now you know. It's right there, right? Now, when somebody tells you this, warmer, no, colder, warmer, hotter, what are they doing? They're giving you information, right? And what does that mean that they're giving you information? There are all these possible directions that they could have given you, but they gave you the one that's going to take you to the Easter egg. Okay, so you've been given information. Okay, so the Easter egg hunt becomes successful when the Easter egg is very well hidden and it's a needle in the haystack problem when you get new information. Now, let's look at Richard Dawkins and an example that he has of a Darwinian search. I'm going to skip through because these are slides that I developed, and as I said, I wanted to try some new things here, and it seems to be working. You seem to be following it. I hope I'm not deluding myself, but let's just skip ahead. The Dawkins delusion, yes. Okay. Here's this is a prime example of search in Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker. And he uses this example. This is what's really supposed to nail it down. The power of cumulative selection. Okay. Some evolutionary theorists, by the way, they say, well, it's like whenever we design people, we use some term. It's like, well, you're talking about evolutionary search, but we're not really searching for things because there's no pre-specified target. Well, there is a target. Being alive is a target. If you're dead, as Steve Meyer so eloquently put it, you're not really a viable candidate for anything. But anyway, so here's this example of a search, okay, which is supposed to illustrate the power of Darwinian evolution. And What he's trying to do is he's trying to get to this final state. Actually, it's cut off here, so let me just go back. This is, okay, this one did it in 43 steps. So here's the deal. He's got this target sequence, which is a sequence of letters and spaces, 28 letters and spaces. So these are representing spaces. And he thinks it is like a weasel, which is taken from Shakespeare's Hamlet. And what he's going to do is he's going to start with a random string. This is an initialization. That's always how these searches work. You have an initialization. You've got an update rule, how you're going to go from one step to the other. You've got a fitness that's going to tell you, are you getting better? Are you closer? You know, warmer, warmer, not. And then you've got a stop criterion. Stop criterion in this case is, do we match up with methinks it is like a weasel? And so you start with this sequence, and then lo and behold, by just randomly varying letters here and then making them basically stick or saying that there's a selective advantage when a letter corresponds to the final letter, that's going to give a sequence selective advantage. And then lo and behold, in 43, or in this case 47 steps, you can evolve to this target sequence. Okay? Now, and Dawkins admits, he says, you know, yeah, this is contrived because in nature you don't have things quite specified as clearly in advance. But I want to run with this a little bit, okay? Because if you just start with a random sequence like this, and if you just keep running and just doing random stuff with these sequences, and don't give some sort of advantage to sequences when they match up letter by letter with the target sequence, what are you going to get? It's just going to be random gibberish, and it's going to take, on average, since this is about, it's about the probability of getting this on a single trial is about 1 in 10 to the 40. That's the number here. It's going to take, on average, about 10 to the 40 steps, and that's how the mathematics works. Probabilities and waiting times end up being really the same thing. How many steps, how many times, opportunities you have to, or how many trials you need in order to get to the target corresponds to the improbability of getting there in any one step. So my point is this, okay? He is not doing a blind search, right? He is doing something else. There's something else going on in this search, because a blind search would take 10 to the, not 43, but 10 to the 40 steps on average to get there, okay? Now, this is where basically Dawkins stops. He stops the discussion here. And I would call this Dawkins' free lunch or Darwin's free lunch, because what they're saying is, look, a fully blind search is not going to get you there, right? It's going to take 10 to the 40 steps. We don't have the computer time to get there. But look, if we do a Darwinian process where we have fitness and where we make this the target sequence, we can get there in 43 steps. That's very manageable. See, evolution can do things in real time much faster than blind search can. Boom, end of story. See, so we should accept Darwinism. Okay, now, that's where it ends, okay? And I'm not really caricaturing it. Now, let me ask you this. Let's look at the Easter egg hunt example, because I think it can make things a little clearer. Remember, huge area, I'm not going to be able to do a blind search. That corresponds to the blind search there, to find that Easter egg. So how did I find that Easter egg? Well, somebody was feeding me information, right? Warmer, colder, warmer, warmer, hot. Okay? Where did that information come from? Did that information come randomly? No. I mean, somebody who knew where the egg was told me, came up with that information. Likewise, with this algorithm, you feed into the algorithm. I mean, what did I say was in every search? You had an initialization, where you're starting from. You need a fitness, which is saying, basically, how am I doing? How good is my solution? You need an update rule, which tells you how to use that information to keep going. And then finally, you need to have a stop criterion. When am I good enough? When should I stop the search? Okay? Now, all of that is information. Okay? And so Dawkins stops it here and says as though, well, see how Darwinian processes do better than random processes. And I would say, amen, that's right, they do. But why do they do it? Because you fed information into them. Okay? And so this is really a much stronger argument than trying to say, well, there's just too much discontinuity in evolution. The Darwinian mechanism of natural selection can't bridge these gaps. This is really an in-principle argument. It's saying, look, the Darwinian mechanism itself is inherently teleological. It has information built into it. You can't get around that information problem. Okay, and so this I think ends up being a very powerful critique of this whole approach. Now I want to generalize this a little bit further, okay? Because I've just now talked about Easter egg hunts and also about how this then can apply to, well, this is an example of a type of evolutionary search. I would put it to you that it applies entirely to biology as well. But to do that, let me describe to you then this conservation of information result. And to illustrate this, let me give you an analogy, okay? In life, we pay money to increase probabilities. For instance, you have a child who you want to get into a good college. You want to get their SAT scores up, so you pay money to send them to some SAT score facilitating company. They get their SAT scores up. It doesn't guarantee that they're going to get into the college they want, but it's going to increase the probability. So you've paid money to increase probabilities. Imagine the following scenario. There's a lottery. Let's say it's a state lottery, but it's a fair lottery. Fair in a technical mathematical sense that all the money put in is going to be paid out. Okay, that's not how state lotteries work, but let's imagine that this one does. And so far, 1 million tickets have been purchased, okay? Which means that every ticket has a 1 in a million chance of winning, and $1 million would get paid off. Now, you decide you're going to buy a ticket. So you buy a ticket, and now it's 1,000,001 tickets that have been purchased, and you have 1 in 1,000,001 probability of winning, okay? What is your expected return on this lottery in terms of, this is in statistical terms, statistical utilitarian terms? Well, I'm talking expected return. It's actually 0, okay? You have a 1 in 1,000,001 probability of winning $1 million, okay? And you have a 1 or a million over 1,000,001 probability of losing $1. And when you put those together, you subtract one from the other, it ends up being, they end up being 0. So it's, this is your expectation. Now, imagine you want to increase your probability of winning that lottery. For some reason, it's really important to you to win it, or you really like to increase your probability. How would you do it? Well, you'd buy more tickets, right? Let's say you buy 1 million tickets. Okay, now what's happened? Now your probability of winning that lottery has gone up to 1/2, right? Other people have bought 1 million tickets, you've bought 1 million tickets, okay? Now you've invested all that money, but what is your expected return on your investment? It's still 0, okay? Now you have a probability of 1/2 of winning $1 million, and you also have a probability of 1/2 of losing $1 million. Okay, and we can keep playing this game. Let's say you buy 10 million lottery tickets. Okay, now now your probability is about 90% of winning it, but you also have a 10% chance of really losing a lot of money. Okay, and those balance out, and so again, your expected return, your return on investment, is 0. So this would not be a good, economic strategy. Well, likewise, I would put it to you that it's not a good informational strategy to think that you can buy higher probabilities in these sorts of evolutionary scenarios, that somehow you can get something for nothing. Okay, and here's how this works. When it comes to information theory, it's not the lottery example is an analogy. Okay, but it's close. But it is a bit different. What happens is, Invariably, in these evolutionary scenarios, and I gave the example of the methinks it is like a weasel, but it holds also in real life biological evolution. You have there's some structure, something you're looking at that you want to evolve, okay? There's a certain improbability connected with that as a result of purely blind forces, okay? Blind search is going to have a very low probability of bringing this structure about. Let's call that low probability P, okay? And then, so that was the probability of 1 in 10 to the 40, okay? Which is over here, which may be out of sight. Okay, that's the sort of brute improbability. My colleagues at the Evolutionary Informatics Lab, Bob Marks and others, will call this the endogenous probability, or endogenous information that's connected with that. Probabilities in information theory, information measures being corresponding. And then what you find is that in fact you can generate this sequence in maybe 50 steps with probability 0.7 or something. I don't know, it depends on the algorithm and all that, but it's going to be pretty high. So you've increased the probability. It was P before, very small, and now it's gone up to Q. Okay? This is how I'm explaining now how conservation of information works. Okay, so this is where this is going. Remember, we did this sort of exercise with the lottery. We had a probability of 1 in a million, that was P, and then we raised it to 1/2 and to 9/10. Okay, so this is what we're concerned about. Without the glories of Darwin, we got this probability P, very small, of these structures being evolved. Okay, now we've got a Darwinian mechanism working for us, and that probability has jumped up to Q. Okay, and you say, wow, isn't that amazing? Okay, but Darwin and Dawkins and the rest of the Darwinian community usually leave it there and say, isn't it amazing what Darwinian processes can do? But the question then is, well, how did that probability raise up? What accounts for that raise in the probability? Okay, and this is a serious question because when you read the Darwinian literature, it's as though if you put heredity, random variation, natural selection, replication, you put those things together, you're automatically going to get a lot of interesting stuff happening. And it's not the case. You can put all those key Darwinian elements together and nothing interesting will happen. Okay? There's something more. I mean, it happens in the evolutionary computing. You can't just mix these things together. There has to be information to guide it to that target state. So I want to say how this conservation of information works. It's again, you're trying to raise a probability from P to Q. You've got a blind search that has a very low probability. You've got some sort of, call it directed search or an alternate search. Let's call it alternate search so we don't prejudice what's behind that, which has raised the probability substantially to Q. But then the question you have to ask is, well, where did that search come from? It's the same question we asked about the Easter egg. Where did that instruction set come from to guide me to the Easter egg? Okay, that required information. And it turns out if we take search seriously, and then ask, what is it that makes searches work? It turns out we then are confronted with, it becomes kind of a self-referential thing. What is the search for the search? How did Dawkins find the search that gets us to this target? Okay, I mean, he didn't just pull it out of a hat. In fact, I mean, he came up with a fitness landscape that allowed this search to work. Okay, so this is why I keep saying search. You need to think of information in terms of search. Okay, so we have a search that works. Why does it work? Because Dawkins searched for a fitness landscape. He searched for a search that would work. Okay, and so now we've got a search for the search. Okay, how did that happen? Okay, well, it turns out when you run the mathematics, and these are results. These are very rigorous. We proved, I think, the first of these. We call them S4S results. Okay, search for the search. First result was in the Journal of Advanced Computational Intelligence and something. It's a long journal title out of Japan. And then there were subsequent results where we've refined them and got them more general. But what happens is, when you try to account for, okay, the search for the search, how do you find a search that's effective at a probability level Q of finding the target? It turns out you have to pay a probability cost of P over Q to find the search for the search that does it. So when you then run the mathematics, doing a search P over Q to find a search that with probability Q finds the search, it turns out the probability of finding that original target ends up having still probability P. So you haven't gained anything. Okay? Let me put it this way. When you factor in the cost, the probabilistic or the information theoretic cost of the search for the search in getting to the target, you haven't gained anything. In fact, usually you actually lose something. We call it conservation of information because that's the best, breaking even is the best you can do. Usually these search for the search spaces end up being so big that it becomes actually much harder to search in these higher order search spaces than in the lower order search spaces. So you're better off just doing a plain blind search. What I'm describing to you also ties into a whole bunch of what are called no free lunch theorems, but it actually extends that work. The most general formulation of these results appears in a book that came out. It's an anthology. Cornell, it was a conference at Cornell in 2011. World Scientific Publishers out of Singapore, Biological Information, subtitled New Perspectives. And it's a general theory of search and the cost of search. So it's an article that I have in there. And we're running out of time, aren't we? Yep. So that's the result, and it's this is probably the clearest I've been able to make it to people. So it may still be, you may think this is still difficult going, but it's. These are the most homespun examples that I've got, but I think they also do convey something. So it's not just that I'm totally dumbing it down, right? I mean, if you can get the Easter egg hunt example and the lottery example, I think you've really got something there, okay? It's that these evolutionary searches don't buy you anything. They have to be informed. The information which allows these searches to work has to be put in there. And one of the things we've done then is we've taken these results and then applied them to a lot of the computer simulations that people point to, which are supposed to show that evolutionary computing can in fact generate information for nothing. And what these results show rather is that whenever you have a successful search, it's because information has been put in there. It's been smuggled in often, because what the evolutionists are doing is they're playing this find the P, and the P is there, and you just have to follow it fast enough. One way I like to put it also is in terms of an accounting problem, where basically, it's like you've got evolution is this great Ponzi scheme, and you've got to find, track the money, and eventually you can see that it's bankrupt, But it sometimes takes a bit of doing, and so we've done this for the EV program of Tom Schneider. We've done it for the AVITA program of the Digital Evolution Lab at MSU. We've done it for Tom Ray's Tierra program. So if you go to the Evolutionary Informatics Lab website, evoinfo.org, you'll find all this stuff there. The publications page indicates the publications. This is all in the peer-reviewed literature. And then also you'll have various simulations and where we'll go through all of this and show how this in fact works and how it is really smoke and mirrors. So these results, I think, really nail it down that information is something that cannot be captured by these material processes, that they ride at least independently over that.